Okay, look, we're all busy. There is a lot of material out there to read. So if a book isn't grabbing my attention, if I'm kind of feeling like reading the book is a chore more than anything, then that is usually a sign that the book doesn't have good pacing. In the current market, readers prefer plot-driven fiction. They prefer to read a story about a character overcoming a major obstacle by the end of the book. Each scene must contribute to the character overcoming the obstacle before them, heightening suspense and tension as the climax approaches. So there are a couple issues that can arise with pacing. One is too slow pacing and one is too fast pacing. In too slow pacing, this issue usually comes up when there is underdeveloped sources of conflict, no clear plot, unlikable characters or underdeveloped characters. So this is where you could start to see the pillars of writing starting to come together, because the conflict, character development, tension, these are some major pillars that we're talking about here. And these pillars are also supporting the pacing in your book. So if you don't have a good grasp on character development, tension, plot progression, conflict, if you don't have a good grasp on those things, your book's pacing is going to suffer. Now, there are some books in which the plot development, the character development, the tension, everything is good, but the book's pacing is still slow because of showing versus telling issues. Showing versus telling essentially means that instead of allowing the action to unfold on the page, the author is glossing over that action or summarizing it by telling. Okay, and I am actually going to read an example from the blog on showing versus telling on my website. Okay, so a really basic example of this is you have one sentence that says, he's tall. You have another sentence that says, when he stood, his head brushed against the ceiling. Okay, so by that sentence, his head is brushing against the ceiling, you can tell, obviously he's a tall dude, right? Now, that is a good example of showing something, putting this character in an environment that allows the reader to kind of piece two and two together to understand, hey, this guy's tall, as opposed to the other sentence that's purely telling, he's tall. Some ways to show instead of tell in your writing. You want to incorporate action and dialogue. So in the example, when he stood, his head brushed against the ceiling, that is using action. It's basically he's standing up, action, and his head is brushing against the ceiling, action, okay? So that's a really simple way to integrate showing into your story. Another way is to be descriptive and specific, especially when it makes a difference to the story. This is really important. You want to keep your descriptions for important things like fight scenes or pivotal moments in the book, or especially the climax. You want to keep those scenes, you want to describe them very specifically. And you can do this by using sensory detail. Using those five senses is a really good way to draw readers into your story and make your scene come alive on the page. A caveat, okay? Do not show everything in the novel. It's not necessary to show every single little thing. So if your character is getting dressed in the morning and it's just a regular day, just a regular small detail, okay? That is not necessary to say, oh, she looked to her right and felt the cashmere in her closet. No. You want to reserve showing for scenes of importance. Things like a turning point, conflict, a setback or an obstacle, a crisis that your character has to deal with. Anything like this, it's fantastic. Show. Everything else, all the minor details, things that are not important, that's okay to tell. Okay, the other issue with pacing is too fast pacing. And this tends to happen when there is a fast-paced scene. Think a shootout between your main character and the bad guy. And the author just writes it too fast. So you're basically doing a disservice to your novel, because in high stakes situations like this, it's really important to slow down time. So basically, what happens to humans in a period of really high stress is that things seem to slow down. Time seems to slow down. And this happens when the adrenaline response kicks in, right? So if you have a similar situation in your story where it's the book's climax, or it's one of the major obstacles, or one of the crises that the character is dealing with in the book, it's really important that you make sure that you are slowing down and exploiting the situation and really leaving your readers grasping onto every word to really draw things out. So depending on whatever situation is taking place in your book, if your character is going through an adrenaline response, for example, he or she might experience diminished sound. They might have their heartbeat pounding in their ears. They could be super focused on the threat, so almost like a tunnel vision. So one of my notes here on this from my manuscript critique service is you want to slow down the scene and milk it for all it's worth. And that's totally true. This is one of the marks of good pacing, is you want to make sure that you aren't explaining the scene too quickly, but you also want to make sure that you're not going too slow as well. So it can be a difficult balance, but getting that balance is really what pacing is all about. Okay, so questions to ask for pacing. Does the book drag in spots due to excessive narration or from uninteresting scenes? So another thing that is important is that your writing itself can really have an impact on your book's pacing. Unclear writing, vague narration, anything where the writing is not crisp and clear and easy to understand right away is what you want to avoid. You absolutely need to make sure that that everything that you are writing is understandable. Here's an example. Some authors, especially new authors, they feel like they need to be overly formal in their writing. And this is usually a sign of someone who just doesn't have experience, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they tend to adopt a stilted and a formal writing style, in the sense that they use too formal vocabulary words, or you might have heard the phrase like a $5 word or a $20 word or whatever, and those high vocabulary words are okay to use in moderation. But if you're an author and you're using these high-level vocabulary words multiple times in one sentence, that's that's usually not where you want to be. So the issue with this is that when you're writing, when you have when you have super high level vocabulary words, especially concentrated many times in one sentence or one paragraph, and even worse if your entire writing is like this, your entire book is like this, that could be really damaging, because instead of readers being able to easily understand what you're saying, it becomes more work to read your book than anything, in the sense of, instead of, relaxing, I have my book, blah, 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 it feels like you're reading a college textbook. And for fiction, that's not what we want. No. So your pacing can also take a hit if you have too many high-level vocabulary words and a stilted, formal writing style. It slows down the pacing of the book. It takes the reader out of the story. And really anything that takes the reader out of the story is detrimental, because your ultimate goal here is you want readers to get lost in your book. You want them to almost forget that they're reading. And so anything that takes readers out of that will slow your book's pacing. Okay, question number 2. Is the writing over wordy or vague, slowing down the pace of the scenes? So here's another example where writing itself can actually detract from your book's pacing and make the pacing slow. If the pacing is too slow, it just drastically reduces reader engagement. You just want to make sure that you keep the book's pacing going along at a good clip.